God bless you. God has truly blessed my life in so many ways. I give thanks to Him every day. God, thank you for everything that you do. The things that I'm a part of are just so extraordinary. I get to be the person who delivers a faithful message in this day and age. It's not been an easy task. There's so much that I want to say, so much to talk about, so many experiences that I have become a part of that are beyond human comprehension for the most part. Not until it's revealed does one really see the grandeur of how extraordinary all this stuff is. And that's all on God's time and however He chooses to do that. I'm simply grateful to be a part of anything that He is allowing for within my life, knowing, how far removed I once was and what I've suffered to bring this message to life. It is just absolutely amazing, and I'm just truly grateful again to be a part of it. Sharing the things that I have done in my past, the kind of person that I was very cavalier. And I use that word loosely, but I was very cavalier in my falling away. And I went out into the world and I got lost. And if anyone who's ever been lost and has found their way back, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're unfamiliar with what that is, it's basically I had fallen away from God, and I got so caught up with myself and desire and the ways of the world that had I not found repentance and ultimately salvation, I would have been lost. And it's a classic tale of the prodigal son. Perhaps you know it. It's basically God gave me everything that I needed, and I set out on course to life, and I went and squandered it all and lost it all, and time and again. And it wasn't until I finally realized where I was and what was going on, and came back, that He opened, welcomed me back and opened up with open arms, that sort of stuff. I mean, it is an amazing gift, and none of this would be possible without Jesus. So I give it up to Him daily, and whether you call yourself a Christian or a faithful person or even a non-believer, there is so much truth to everything that we're revealing here that it's just absolutely undeniable. We have scientific proof of the things that we are doing, everything from the insight themselves to even the persecutions and things that I've endured in order to bring this message to life. It's not been easy. It hasn't. I talk to people about this every day, and the more that I talk to people and the more that this message reaches the masses, the more that I realize that there are a lot of people who are suffering the kinds of things that I've been put through. And since the world has changed, because I assure you the world has changed, but since it's changed, it's my responsibility now to continue to shine light on the things that aren't right and bring it to attention so that we can have change, and for the better, not for the worse. We've seen plenty of that over the last several decades. There's been a downfall, not just in this nation, but around the world. There have been a lot of people who've fallen away, and the world has gotten a bit colder, it seems. But we are changing that now, and you can see the differences and the changes. People standing up and calling wrong, calling things out that have been suppressed for so long. And one of those things that I have suffered through immensely to bring this message is parental alienation. It is a really sad day for civil courts when you look at this is the law that they are trying to enforce, and the pain and suffering that has come along through the civil courts just in this nation alone is horrible. I absolutely cannot believe that this is America when I look at what's going wrong with the Attorney General's office and parental alienation and just the child abuse and the negligence and the greed and corruption. It's just completely immoral. And I'm coming from a very faithful standpoint, so I don't take sides in terms of red or blue. I take God's side, and I bring God's perspective on the things that I'm witness. So realizing that parental alienation is, if you're unfamiliar with it, it's basically It describes a process through which a child becomes estranged from a parent as a result of psychological manipulation of another parent. All right? The child's estrangement may manifest itself as fear, disrespect, hostility towards a parent, and could even extend to additional relatives or parties, things like that. The kind of parental alienation that I have experienced is my child, my son, my youngest son, was taken from me at childbirth, right? He was born into this world with my last name. I was not invited to the hospital. From that moment, the ex, who is my ex-wife, she took control over the child and removed me in any way possible. Now, how is this possible? She had millions of dollars at the time. I didn't have any money. All right? I didn't have any money. So understanding that a person could emphasize this much influence on the system that's already broken, it's already so far gone, it has to be completely revamped. But to influence that kind of manipulation on a system in order to do the things that I'm about to share with you. So from the start, my child taken from me, given someone else's last name, she gave him her ex-husband's last name, and the courts approved it and all that stuff, and continued from that moment on to do her worst to try to destroy the very things that I had been a part of. Anything that I was trying to do in order to bring resolution was met by hostility, adversity, and ultimately trampled upon and totally decimated in order so that they could keep their position with parental alienation. And as challenging as some people might think that parental alienation is, and so there are even, the doctors and physicians, and I'm sure the lawyers don't want this to happen, but as much evidence as there is, they're trying to say that this isn't a part of what's really going on, when the truth is that there is a real issue going on here. And to give you a little perspective on some of the things that I suffered through, the way parental alienation works is I would get phone calls out of the blue from my ex with my son, whom, by the way, I've never met. He's 17 now. I've been suffering through this for 17 years. I would get phone calls out of the blue from my ex, and he was a child at the time, 4 years old, very young, things like that. And she would have him on a speakerphone, and she would say, we just wanted to call and tell you how much we don't love you and that we were going shopping for a new dad. And she would emphasize that and try to reinforce that inside of his mind moving forward. And the phone calls, they progressed. Just imagine terrible calls like that from a person who you want to love, right? Coming from a child who has no idea of what the concept of being loved is really about. I would get phone calls like that, and she would dangle him over the phone call like a piece of bait or something, and I would agree to the things that she was doing so that I could go and meet him. But then at the end of the conversation, she would find some reason to fight and then go and make him tell me he doesn't love me and then hang up on me. And then, to even top it off, would show up at the location the next day and make it look like I didn't want to be there. I didn't understand the psychology of what I was suffering through at the time. I understand it now. These are extreme cases of what parental alienation is, and when you have a malicious parent, they call this malicious mother syndrome, who is hell-bent on exacting retribution and doing anything possible in order to make that happen. And then manipulating the courts. Things like, when I'd show up for an AG hearing or something, though I was trying everything I could to do the things that they were asking of me, she was systematically dismantling all the things that I was a part of. So realizing that she was playing the courts at the same time, trying to do the things that she was doing to me, and there wasn't anyone or any kind of repercussion towards her behavior. I told the courts about it, I told the judge about it, and they dismissed it like there wasn't anything to it. And this went on for years at a time, and I fell even further and further and further behind on child support. It got to the point where this became a routine, and they were lining up to try and do their worst to me on the regular. Parental alienation, there's just more to it than just keeping the child away from another parent. She was trying to rescue this child from someone who doesn't need rescuing from, right? Someone that the child does not need rescuing from. If you don't know anything about me, I am a very faithful person of God. I'm very spiritual. I write books. I praise and worship God, and I'm very open about my faith. I inspire people every day as much as I can. I give myself willingly to anyone who's in need. I give all that I can, especially to friends or anybody who's really in need of something. I want to help them. Like, that's what I do. Like, I'm a very loving, kind, generous person, and these are my attributes and these are my characteristics. So when you have someone who's making all these false accusations about a person like myself and manipulating the system in order to do this, and realizing what's really going on with the system here, it's really sad to understand that this is going on in America, in particularly Williamson County, Texas, right? I've never seen as much corruption or negligence in that county as I have over these past 10 years. What I've witnessed, though, coming from them is slander and defamation and libel and just basically trying to undermine the very things that the courts were asking me to do. And then when I would go to the courts to tell them about this, they didn't think anything of it. In fact, what they would do was trip me up to get me back in jail to increase the debt. And if you look at the numbers, the debt that they had created is literally over $200,000 now. And I know what you're thinking, or perhaps some people think that, well, why don't you just pay this? Every opportunity that I have tried to take care of this, to move this in the right direction, was met by ultimately them jamming me up and putting me back in jail for another 6 months while the debt increased. So they raised my child support up to over $1,250 a month. And if you do the math, if you keep somebody in jail for 6 months at $1,250 a month, that adds up, right? And getting out of jail, trying to get back on your feet, you fall even further behind just trying to get a job. But by the time you get there, they go back into court and say, well, you didn't make 6 months worth of payments, you're going back to jail. And the cycle perpetuates, right? So here we are, this debt just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So I prayed about it, and I was working for a resolution towards it. And last year they put me on a probation. Okay, let's go back a little bit even further than that. They set me up to be prosecuted unjustly for this debt that they created. So fighting through this for almost 2 years, right? They said that basically all they had to prove was that the judge gave me an order and I didn't follow it. I tried every opportunity I could to try to do the things that I was called to do, at the same time taking the responsibility of stepping up to what they were asking of me, simply trying to find a peaceable solution moving forward. And ultimately, they threatened me with 2 years in prison if I didn't take the plea deal to cop to a conviction for child support rearages. I'd never heard of anything like this before, and I called a bunch of attorneys, and they all said the same thing. I've never heard of this before. I've never heard this before. Oh, I've only heard of one case. I got one attorney who said, I've heard of this once before. But then they had to prove that this person who had all this money was simply trying to avoid paying, trying to keep his money from, taking care of the responsibility, which wasn't the case in my case at all. I was making every attempt that I could to pay, and every attempt that I was paying, and there's even records of it, they would take the money and then they would imprison me, and they would take the money and then they would imprison me, and the debt just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they prosecuted me over the debt that they created. Like, I couldn't seem to understand what all that stuff was about. But then I realized that the courts, they weren't taking any action on this because it was behooving them to incarcerate a person. And if you're unfamiliar with the way that the Attorney General's office works in a situation like this, they take a person who they say is in arrears and they hold on to them. And then they talk to the state, and the state has to pay them money for keeping up with this. They say, well, we're holding this guy, he's breaking the law, you're going to have to cover that. And so they put him in a private jail, and they milk the system because they get their money from the state, and the state gets backed by the government because this is supposedly the law. So while a person is sitting in jail for child support, not only do their payments continue, but their interest goes on. Their interest keeps raising. And so when you have a person like myself who's sitting in jail trying to take care of the responsibility, the debt would just keep growing and growing. And you know, they got to the point where they were literally breaking the law in order to try and enforce it. And I called them out on that, and they didn't particularly like it. In fact, the judge has held me in contempt for finally speaking up on all these things that I have been suffering through, and they were looking at me like I'm a bad person. Guys, if you know who I am, I walk with God. Like, God is a really good friend. I'm a friend of God's, and I follow after Jesus Christ, and I have a ministry, and I profess that He's the Savior, and I lead by example. And if you look at anything that I'm a part of, you see for yourself that I am the kind of person that you want to hang around with. So when you look at what the Attorney General's office from Williamson County, particularly what they've been doing, is they've basically allowed for parental alienation to run rampant, okay? And what has happened is basically the child is the person who has suffered. Now, he has been taught to hate me. He has been kept from everybody on this side of the family who loves him, right? I'm talking about his grandparents, his brother, his half-brother, right, his stepbrother, his uncle, his aunt, his cousins. Like, everybody who wants to love him and wants to be a part of his life has been systematically removed, and no one has said anything to the mother. Even though I have 1,000 people right now that will stand up and testify to her character and the things that she's been doing to do this sort of stuff, they've allowed for parental alienation to go on. And in the process of my civil rights and my constitutional rights being broken and ultimately violated, they have allowed for this thing to just become what it is. And if you're unfamiliar with parental alienation, there are a couple different levels, a couple of different degrees of it. The extreme degree being the obsessed kind, where they are completely unjustified in any of the things that they're doing. There's malicious in their antics, and they go out and do every single thing that they can to try to, you know, hurt somebody, the other parent, in order to keep their good standing with the child and make themselves out to be the right person. Guys, I'm here to tell you that parental alienation is wrong. Children deserve to be loved by everybody, especially the parents and their, you know, siblings, and, you know, people that really want to nurture them and help be a part of their lives. Children are deserving of that. Where the Attorney General's office and the states of the United States of America are faltering is by allowing this kind of behavior to run rampant and not having any repercussions or way to get out of this stuff. You know, if you're unfamiliar with what goes on in the AG's office, it's not like a regular courtroom. A regular courtroom, I could have presented all this information to a person and say, listen, this is what I'm going through. What do you guys think? And a jury of my peers would say, wait, that's not right. Let's fix this. But in Attorney General's court, they close the door behind you, and they have the judge who bases their salary on the amount of people and how much money they can collect every year. So they're already on the other side of trying to put people in jail because they're going to get paid that way. Then you have another attorney who works for the Attorney General's office who advises usually the mother on how to go about getting more money out of the person who they have this issue with. So there's one, there's two, there's three people lined up against that person behind closed doors, where they are faltering with the law, especially God's law. And this is why I have such a big issue with all this stuff, because at the end of it, there's no legitimate justification for people treating people this way. There's not. If we really truly want a great world and we want to acknowledge that there's a right and there's a wrong, then wrong behavior, especially in a courtroom, is wrong. Coming from a corrupt judge who is only in it for the money, right? If they were really in it for doing the right thing for the children, they would have stopped the sort of things that I've been suffering through for as long as I've suffered and ultimately wrongfully convicted over. Guys, when you hear about what my story is really about, you're going to understand why I'm sharing these things with you. But I also hope that you understand that there is a resolution for it, right? It's called forgiveness. If you have a problem with someone who you love so much to have a child with, if you have a problem, you sit down and you work it out amicably. We don't need a third party, especially the state or some government, to come in and tell us how we're supposed to be civil towards one another. The only thing that they're really doing now is collecting money and allowing for that separation and division to perpetuate, which is ultimately causing the real pain and suffering with the children. And if you want to get technical on all this stuff, look at all these shootings that have been going on in the United States over these last several years. They're coming from fatherless children. They're coming from broken homes. They're coming from people who have neglected them, right? They're coming from, I guarantee you, you're going to find a lot of parental alienation inside of those kinds of antics. So why are we allowing that to happen in this world? Is money more important? Is it? Because I serve God. I don't serve money. And I don't care what person has to say about me. I know I'm doing right by God. And if you look at the things that I'm a part of, you'll agree. I'm doing right. Why is it my child was taken from me at birth, used as the weapon against me his entire life, dangled over me like bait, and then ultimately put through a system by a person who only wanted retribution, and the courts and this great state of Texas did nothing about it? Can anyone answer me that? You know, the thing that comes to mind right now is greed, corruption, immorality, unrighteousness, unconstitutional, things like that. So I pose it to you. If you're interested in hearing more about this stuff, you know, subscribe to my vlog, come visit my website, james-martinez.com. Check out any of the social media things that I'm a part of. Guys, I'm here to help the world get to a better place. God sent me. And I'm here to share messages like this to try to inspire people to make the right decisions, to stand up against injustice, to don't let go of hope, and realize that you're going to get through whatever the things is that you're suffering. And parental alienation is soon to be a thing in the past. If this country and this world has any common sense, you'll realize that what's wrong is wrong, but what's right by God is what's right. So get into alignment with that. If you want to pass a law and you want to fix the law, you want to help make things right for children in this world, especially for our future, right? Then start doing the right thing, not just in our courtrooms, but start doing the right thing in here. Start doing the right thing with your actions. God bless you guys. Thanks for listening.